Hey guys, Dylan from Noble Records coming at you with another video. You guys know if you watch my channel that I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fanatic. I've been collecting them for, since I was probably about 10 years old. My favorite band of all time. But today we're going to talk about this record. Is it really worth $5,000? That's kind of the title of the video. Obviously, to say what it's worth depends on a lot of different things, but we're going to go through the history of this album, what makes this version really rare, and through the course of this video I'm going to show you all the indicators to show if you have this particular copy, and towards the end of the video I'm going to show you some interesting copies of Led Zeppelin 1 that I have found over the years. Before we get started, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, leave me a like, leave me a comment. Would love to engage with you guys over here on YouTube. We have a brick and mortar record store in Matthews, North Carolina called Noble Records, where we buy big collections, recommended records. We have our own record label. We have releases and everything that come out every month. So check us out on Instagram at Noble Records. All right, so let's get down to it and talk about the history of this extremely rare Led Zeppelin record. Now you may be thinking, I have that Zeppelin record in my collection. Is it worth $5,000? Let's cash it in. Pump the brakes a little bit. We're going to talk about if it's the exact same one. First off, these blue letters and the blue badge there is kind of the main indicator. Most Zeppelin ones have this burnt orange lettering. So this is kind of known amongst Zeppelin collectors and record collectors as the turquoise Zeppelin. That's what I've called it for years. That's what I've heard a bunch of other people call it. But the story behind this is kind of interesting. So back when Led Zeppelin was getting started, we all know the story very well. Jimmy Page was this great session musician from the time he was really a kid. He was in the studio. He had played on some great recordings. He got put into the Yardbirds. When he was in the Yardbirds, he tried to influence the Yardbirds to go like in a more heavy direction to make some heavier music, and wanted to emphasize like heavy blues. He really liked, what the Stones did with the whole blues revival and everything, and he wanted to do that, but heavier. The Yardbirds were kind of like, thanks, but no thanks. We don't really want to go in that direction. And so he decided that he wanted to form somewhat of a supergroup. He wanted to handpick musicians that he thought would be perfect to fulfill his mission of this heavy psychedelic blues rock. And so that was the birth of Led Zeppelin 1. He found John Paul Jones doing some studio work, pulled him in. John Bonham was this ferocious drummer, pulled him in. Robert Plant was a friend of his, and pulled them all in, and it was just this magic chemistry, amazing. And so there was a lot of buzz around this record coming out. Was a big deal. The record company Atlantic wanted to make sure that this hit the scene in a really huge way, and that it made the impact that they knew that it would make. And so when they put this record out, in the UK, the first pressing had this blue lettering. Now, the story goes that when the band saw this, they decided that this was kind of a soft-looking cover because of that blue text. They didn't like that turquoise text. And so Peter Grant was their manager. He was known to be a very intimidating figure, very big, rough, rude, down to brass tacks type of guy. He marched down there to Atlantic and said, no. I think he wanted it to more emulate the look of maybe Fire and wanted it to be a little bit more intimidating, so he felt like switching that text out fulfilled that goal, and that kind of seals the fate for the turquoise Zeppelin. Now, this record did still make it out into main circulation. A lot of people ask how many copies of this are available. No one really knows. I've heard anywhere between 500 copies and 5,000 copies, and it's all speculation. I will tell you this, from all my years of collecting, there's no way there's only 500 copies of this. It has popped up time and time again through the years. If it was something that there was only 500 copies of, it would probably hardly ever pop up. Records that are that rare just don't really come around that often. But I think it's more rare than being 5,000 copies. I think general consensus, most people say around 2,000 copies were put out. And so that would be my guess if I had to guess. But again, it would just be a total guess because I have no idea. Nobody has any idea. And so with a band like Zeppelin, they have a huge following. It's not some really obscure record that nobody's ever heard of. It's got, Zeppelin collectors are serious. Bands that are like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, those big bands, they have a lot of collectors that try to track down their stuff. So if there's a rare item like this, the price skyrockets. It's a really, it's a fascinating thing because Led Zeppelin 1, I mean, they put out hundreds of thousands of copies of this. This record is not rare, but this version of the record is very rare. So I came across this maybe a couple years ago. I got a copy. I had a copy, I think maybe 6 years ago I found a copy. Here in North Carolina, actually, which is crazy. I lost my job in 2019. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and I ended up selling a lot of my very collectible guitars and records to open a record store. And so my turquoise Zeppelin, I sold it. And so this was in 2019. It was probably a VG copy. It wasn't super clean, but it wasn't that bad. VG is just kind of like a description. If you don't know record grading very well, it's just, it has some scratches on it, but it still plays fine, kind of type thing. There's no skips, but it has some scratches on it. It's not in great shape. I had that. I sold it for $1,200, which I think was a pretty good deal to the guy I sold it to. I sold it to a buddy. He'd always wanted one. So that was then. Then there was kind of the vinyl boom of 2020. I think the numbers kind of went up a little bit after that. And ended up finding this a couple years ago to kind of replace that copy. Since Zeppelin's my favorite band, it was just one of those albums that I had to track down again. So with this one, there's a few indicators. And even if you have one with the turquoise lettering, here's a couple things to bear in mind. This has been bootlegged. So if you're looking at your copy and it looks like a brand new copy, that's because people in the past, probably 15, 20 years, have bootlegged this album. And, some have tried to pass it off as the original, but then some have just said, hey, it's cool to see it with the original font. So the second indicator is the label. So here's the label. It's got red on top. It's got the plum color label down there at the bottom. What you're going to want to look for, if you're still with me and you still think you have one, on Discogs, there's a website called Discogs.com, Discogs.com, and they're like a database. It's kind of like the Wikipedia of records, you know what I mean? You can type in indicators and stuff like that, and it'll tell you which pressing you have. One term you're going to need to know is the dead wax. So the dead wax is the space between the label and the last groove. There's some empty space right there, and in the empty space, there is what they call matrix numbers, which are inscriptions that the inscriptions will pretty much tell you what pressing you have if you type them into Discogs most of the time. There are some copies that some of the matrix numbers are scratched out and another matrix number is written above it. Those are second pressings. Now, over the years, people have realized that these copies are worth more money. And so they might find like a blue lettered Led Zeppelin 1, but the disc is in poor shape. So then they would switch out with a second pressing, swap discs, and have a really clean disc, and so they could sell it for more. That happened probably, a lot of that happened in the 80s and 90s when people didn't have Discogs and didn't have the internet, and they might not have known what to look for when they were trying to determine if something was a first pressing. So that has been a scam that some people have done over the years. So if yours has the blue lettering, the gray strip at the bottom, there's also one more thing to look out for. So on the label down here at the bottom on both sides, when it has the credits, it says super hype music right there at the bottom. It says that on both sides. If it does not have that super hype music, it's not a first real deal pressing. The second pressings removed that super hype, and so that credit would not be there. So those are the things to look for. If you have the record, if you want to double check and look through all this stuff again, you can look it up on Discogs.com. I'll put the link to the Discogs entry of this particular one that I have in the description of this video. But so if you have one, what's it worth? I have seen these things go for anywhere between, early on, ones that are in bad shape. I've seen them go for $500-600, but over the past few years, I'm not seeing any go that low. After people have there's been a resurgence, in the collectability side of vinyl in the past few years. I've seen them go up. I've seen them go all the way up to, I think the highest one so PopPsych is another platform I use to value records. So if you look at the most one has ever sold for, at the very top there is 7,100 pounds, which I think is like $8,900. And so, another one sold for 5,000 pounds. Another one sold for 9,500 Australian And so, but a lot of them land in this 3,500 range. So if a really nice copy, a lot of them land in that range. And then I've seen a lot also land like in the 2,500 range if they're decent copies. If they're if you can find a decent copy for under 2,500 bucks, I think it'd be a really good deal. And so on Discogs has like all the prices of what they go for. The median price is not really like the average, like it's kind of like an average price, but they kind of use a different formula to determine that median price. But the median price is kind of like middle of the road. $1,731.77 is what it says right now. The highest it's ever sold for on Discogs is $3,375. The lowest it's ever sold for is $40, which is probably a bootleg. And so all that to say, that's just kind of like the valuation of where the numbers are coming from on crazy things like this. Now, inevitably, when I post a video like this, I have people saying, man, that record ain't worth, no record's worth more than $10. You have different types of collectors. You have some collectors that collect just for the utilitarian functionality of a record, where you put it on, you listen to it, and you enjoy it. And that's fine. That's great. It's probably a more healthy way to do it. To somebody like that, this is not going to be worth, anything to them, anything more than just a copy at Walmart would be. But to collectors like me, who really appreciate the history and want something that's the first time anybody experienced Led Zeppelin was with this cover. The collectability side of it, you know what they say. Something's only worth what somebody's willing to pay. And time again, people have paid a lot of money for this, so it is worth a lot of money. If I wanted to sell this tomorrow, I could. I wouldn't. So is it worth $5,000? That's kind of was the title of the video. Some people seem to think it's worth that much. I've seen them in record shows for that much. And I've heard record stores having them for $4,000 or $5,000 as well. I think that it's not one of those things where it's like once in a lifetime. You guys might like freak out on me saying that. They're very hard to come by, but I've owned 2 copies, so it's not impossible to find. I know several other of my friends that have them. They're around. So I think if you were patient and you had one, I think that $2,500 is probably a more reasonable number. But if you want one that's like mint, you might be paying that type of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. This one is not mint. I think that it's probably somewhere in the VG Plus range. It has some hairlines on it. It plays with a just tiny little bit of crackle, but it's a strong playing copy. I'm happy with this one. It's an amazing. I don't think the sound quality is much different on this one as it would be any other copy. It's not known to be one of those like the RL Zeppelin 2 that is just a head and shoulders above the rest of them sound quality wise. So I'm happy with this one. I'm happy with not having a mint one. That being said, if a mint one fell into my lap, I would definitely buy it. But this, and I'm not trying to inflate records and what they're worth and all that stuff. You got to think about this. So there are Pokemon cards that are worth $150,000. I've seen all these, you see these videos on YouTube and stuff where there's toys, there's action figures, there's comic books, there's Pokemon cards, there's baseball cards that are worth this high number. And a lot of that stuff, like, it's important to a certain generation for sure. But as far as like the culturally significance of music, I can't imagine this not going up in value. Something like this that's an extremely rare collectible, not going up in value over time. You have to understand that, like, the collectability of this. I think collectibles like this that are for a big band, you got like this, you got the first UK Dark Side of the Moon, you got the Butcher cover for the Beatles, stuff like that. I think those collectibles are going to go up in value over the next 10, 20 years because they are very culturally significant, even more than just being cool and great records and really rare. They're significant. So I believe that if a Pokemon card is worth $100,000, that a record should be too, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But so anyways, that's my evaluation of the turquoise Zeppelin. Is it worth $5,000? Depends on who you are. I probably wouldn't pay $5,000 for one, but if there was a really, really clean one, I think that it could be. So this copy, like I said, my copy, probably not worth $5,000. I think it's probably worth like $2,500. That being said, I would absolutely never sell it unless I found a better one. So let me show you a few other very cool copies of Zeppelin 1 that I found over years. even though this is like the holy grail that I always wanted since I was a kid, that you only saw pictures of in books, it's actually not my favorite copy of Zeppelin 1. My favorite copy of Zeppelin 1 is this. It is a test pressing of Zeppelin 1. Now, as I was talking about before, just kind of the brief history of Zeppelin forming, there was a huge buzz surrounding this record. Like, people were like, have you heard of the New Yardbirds? Have you heard of this thing that going on? And they even toured a little bit as the New Yardbirds. And so Atlantic, what they did was they pressed up a bunch of these test pressings, and you can kind of see there's a label behind it that says test pressing. So it's on a test pressing label. You know, how many of these are out there? I don't know. I mean, there could be 5 of them. There could be 100 of them. I don't know, but it's extremely rare. But the Atlantic pressed up some of these, and they sent them to the biggest radio stations in the world. And so one of the, just to play for a couple months before Zeppelin 1 came out. So just to promote this record coming out and get everybody hyped about it, they sent these test pressings out to some of the biggest radio stations in the world. This one went to KMET. Here it is right there, which is a huge radio station in California that is all along the West Coast. Probably the biggest rock station in California. Now, if you think about all the influential people that came at that was making music in California at that time, just it's a huge hotbed for artistic output, you know what I mean? And so all those people, the first time they ever heard Led Zeppelin was from this exact copy. That's mind-blowing. So this is one of my favorite ones. I really honestly have no clue what that's worth. Don't care. It's going to stay with me probably until I die. So that's a really cool one. This is another one. The Japanese pressing that is a gatefold is pretty cool. The back has the band members labeled incorrectly. The only one that's right is Jimmy Page. They're like, okay, we know that's Jimmy Page, but the other ones we're just going to guess. That's kind of a funny one. This is a really cool one. This is a first pressing that came from the RCA pressing plants, where they did these brown and purple labels. Most U.S. pressings have like a red and green Atlantic label. This has that like Atco type of brown and purple label. There's a lot of debate on why this exists. It shouldn't. That label should not be on there. There is a little bit of a different mix. There's more time in between tracks. And then Jimmy Page's guitar mix is a little bit louder in this than a lot of the other pressings. So this is a very sought after and rare version of this. This is another one of those. I'm not really sure what it's worth. It's probably worth a few $100, I would have to say. It's a nice, really, really clean version of it. And so that's cool. This is a Spanish pressing. I love the differences in labels. That one is like a lavender and red. I love that one. And then this one is like a Taiwan pressing. So I have more. That's just some of the ones that I pulled out. I have that huge Zeppelin Road Case. I did a video on that a while back. That's one that you should check out. That was, those have gone for 20, 25 grand. Those are huge. That's a very cool video. If you want to seek that one out, I'll put a link to that one in the description of this video as well. And so there's a lot of really cool Zeppelin collectibles in my collection. I think I probably have maybe 300 Zeppelin records. So it's probably way too many. But even as crazy as I am as a collector, there are actually a lot of Zeppelin collectors that are way crazier than I am, that have way more stuff. It gets really, really intense. There's a lot of Zeppelin records that there's only a handful of copies of, like strange colored vinyl things from other countries that are really scarce. 45, stuff like that. There's a lot of Zeppelin collectibles. So I am still kind of a novice when it comes to Zeppelin collectibles, but I do love Zeppelin. They're a lot of fun to collect. So hope you guys learned something from this video. If you did, give me a follow, thumbs up, leave me a comment, all that stuff. We love to hear from you guys. The reason we do these videos is stay connected with the community, and we want to do that. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.